blood, violence, and gore. Everything that's sinister to its core. Not exclusive to horrors. However, this formula was tampered with once the factor of BD getting his search history leaked to his mother led to newfound terrifying things and the birth of the Horror Huff Boys. Together, BD, Ezekiel, and Ho-Ho the Clown, Felicia's new baby daddy. Together we'll fight off the forces of evil and try to brighten the world from a darker future. This is not the Powerpuff Girls intro, but it is for the Horror Huff Boys, which I am a proud member of. And there's no other better intro to start with, especially when I'm talking about the top 5 darkest Goosebumps books that I have read so far. Now, of course, you might be wondering why I'm wearing the jacket. Well, first of all, it's -3 degrees outside where I live in the Midwest. So I'm freezing my butt off right now, especially since I'm in a battle against the bill collector, obviously, and I'm not paying that damn heating bill, so we gotta work with what we gotta work with, all right? Gotta get frostbite on my toes any minute now. But anyway, I need this jacket because we're talking about the cold, dark abyss of kids' horror, which is the darkest books in Goosebumps, and they are, fortunately, all fire, all bangers. So, quite toasty, and I think they're going to heat up this video as I continue going through them. But I did want to mention them because the darkest moments in kids' horror are often the ones that surprise me the most and often impress me the most. So when you get books that are naturally very dark in nature and manage to push the boundaries that kids' horror is able to achieve, especially with the standard Goosebumps formulas that we get in books, they often impress me the most and end up being some of my highest rated books, whether it be by coincidence or whether it be because I just naturally tend to like darker books. Who knows? But I did want to talk about them and give them some respect today. So I do have 5 books so far in front of me that I have ranked accordingly for my own reasons, and there is an honorable 6th to mention. So, if you agree with my list, let me know down below. If you have your own choices for the darkest Goosebumps books, in your opinion, you can let me know down below as well. There are a few books that are not on this list, and it's simply because I have not read them yet. So as I get into the future where I read eventually all the Goosebumps books, I might make an updated list, or I'll just make videos that highlight the specific books that I think are darker and mess up this list in a way. In a good way, but do mess up the list for the future. But anyway, let's talk about my current top 5 and honorable 6th. So to start off with my 6th darkest Goosebumps book that I've read so far, this one did have some very dark moments in it, and especially that twist ending is quite sinister for a Goosebumps book, especially with how the story is structured. It's got a lot of action, it's got a lot of great pacing, and it's very well written, despite being one of the, I guess, 5 or 6 last Goosebumps books that Stein wrote for the OG 62. So yeah, number 6 on my list as an honorable mention would go to Werewolf Skin. A fantastic book, overall very great, and would be higher on pretty much every other list I talk about, except for this one, but it does get my honorable mention. There are some very dark and sinister scenes in here. You get some explicit violence involving animals being killed due to the apex predators in this book, which are werewolves. You have some very descriptive writing involving how there is animal remains that are tattered and torn apart and bloody and meaty. And you do get scenes like this in books that I've read before, such as Werewolf of Fever Swamp, that has some animal murder in it. However, it's all done off screen. And even though this one is kind of done off screen, it's not like Werewolf of Fever Swamp where, the next day Grady just found, these corpses, just lying about. And even though it was messed up and dark, you didn't get that actual tension or suspense as you would in the moment of Werewolf Skin, where Alex is literally moments away from witnessing these animals being killed, and he hears the growling and squealing and noises, and hears the violence going on. He just doesn't see it because otherwise the book would be censored or cause problem and controversy. However, he's moments away from these kills, and when he does stumble upon them, it has much more impact to you. It feels a lot more darker, a lot more gruesome. And you also have the addiction aspect with with certain characters. I almost spoiled it. With certain characters dealing with this werewolf skin, how it peels off their body, how they are obsessed to it, how they're addicted to it. And then the very twist ending is probably one of the most sinister Goosebumps twists out there. And the fact that it got done to such a sympathetic protagonist is quite dark. And for some people that may detract, but it actually emphasized how great this book is to me. So that's my honorable mention, Werewolf Skin. Now to actually get into my top 5, number 5 on my list for the darkest Goosebumps books I have read is actually the only GYG on here, and that is Welcome to the Wicked Wax Museum. Now this book has multiple storylines, as many GYGs do. They are game books where you are the main character, you make choices and get different endings. And the different storylines in this book all have creepy aspects to them. If you dive into the actual wax process of the museum where they're creating wax statues, there are instruments called like skin peelers, which basically peel apart your skin and get you ready to be waxed. That's quite dark. You have the actual Universal Monsters and I guess creature wax statue part of the story, which does involve a certain infamous Goosebumps villain that is in there, and they're described as being encased in the hot wax, and because it's this hot wax that was basically glued onto them and they're encased in it, when it starts melting and peeling off, it's described as being seared flesh under the wax, like burned flesh, which is quite sinister and quite dark. However, the darkest part of this book comes from the Cybele the Wicked storyline. Now, Cybele the Wicked is probably one of the scariest and most gruesome Goosebumps villains out there. She is described as this woman who burned alive in a fire, and due to her surviving, her face and body became horribly disfigured. The skin melted off of her flesh. She looked horrific, and in order to gain back that beauty, she essentially becomes a serial killer and finds child victims or any type of victims and basically removes and taxidermies their bodies and pulls them apart to put different pieces of their bodies onto her face and skin in order to restore it from the fire damage. That's in a kid's horror book. Yes, you heard me right. I'm not bullshitting. That's actually in a kid's horror book. And you can see why it's in my top 5. The way she's described is horrifying. Apparently, the cover of that book is supposed to be Cybele, drawn by Mark Nagata, but it doesn't resemble at all what's talked about in the book. In the book, she's described as having like 2 different colored eyes. One is green, one is blue. However, one of her eyes is sagged down to her cheek, and the other one is higher up. She's missing an eyebrow. Her lips look disfigured. Her nose is crooked. It doesn't look like it belongs on her face. Her hair has like pieces of red, pieces of blonde, pieces of blue, and then pieces of missing skin. So she basically looks like a messed up Mr. Potato Head, except instead of being toy parts, it's human body parts, all assembled weird in her face. And if you imagine what Cybele the Wicked looks like, you would be reminded of some of those depictions of people in like Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, the artwork by Stephen Gammell, or like, I don't know, it's just very terrifying. Like, that's what I get reminded of when it involves Cybele the Wicked. Just a horribly disfigured person. Even like Two-Face, you get pieces of like that and stuff. And yeah, very, very creepy. This Buffalo Bill type of villain that you get in Goosebumps. And the way it's described, how the instrument she uses pulls apart the skin from your body, removes body parts, removes bones. It's all very dark and messed up. And yeah, it definitely deserves number 5 on my list. However, the goofier parts in the book and more lackluster, not as dark regions, because it's a GYG, you get a wide variety. It kind of offsets and puts it down at number 5, the bottom. But the stuff that you do get is so horrifying that if the book was just mostly focused on that stuff, it would have been number 1. But because it's balanced out by the other stuff, it's number 5 on my list. So number 4 on my darkest Goosebumps books I've read goes to a Series 2000 book, and in fact is the very first Series 2000 book and would have been the OG 63rd book out of the original series if Stein didn't decide to move it to Series 2000. And many of you can guess it is Cry of the Cat. Now, Cry of the Cat deals with animal abuse and animal death, and it is quite dark, and that is the foundation of the story. It's not like one scene out of like Night of the Living Dummy 1 where a dog is getting choked out. No. The entire story is based off of this. And it basically revolves around these two kids who are basically actors in a play in their school, and they're getting ready to head over there and audition and practice. However, as the main character girl, I forgot her name, is riding her bike, she runs over a cat. And it's described as soon as she runs over this cat, she hears the screech and she sees the head separate and basically decapitate off of the body and fly in front of her visual view. And she freaks out and jumps off and gets so scared. And as she looks for, this dead cat, she sees, oh, its head didn't fly off. I don't know why I imagined that. And she just sees that she killed an animal. She brings it over to a nearby house, and thinks that, this may belong to the person there. This sickly looking girl opens the door and says, oh, no. You didn't kill any normal cat. You killed Rip the cat. And that's going to haunt you now for as long as you live. She shuts the door on him. The girl is freaked out. And she starts getting haunted by Rip. Rip comes back in many forms. There's a part where they're at the play and this either shelf or cabinet basically falls on top of Rip and basically splatters him, and you hear a plop, and you're basically implied that Rip basically got crushed under this giant object and splattered. Very dark. You have the main character at lunch opening up her lunchbox and finding Rip's decapitated head staring back at her with an open mouth snarled, and she freaks out and leaps back. You have the main character start acting weird. At one point she jumps off of heights and nearly hurts herself really badly, and you just have a lot of dark stuff in there. And then she has to go to a graveyard, try to find out and dig out some bodies to see what's really going on, and it all leads to this basement scene in the climax. And what the main character and her friends see in that basement is horrifying. And if any of you have seen the episode, it's like multiplied twofold when you see the design of a certain character down in that basement. Hooey, quite dark. So yeah, this is a very dark book. It's got some animal abuse in it. It's got some gore. It's got some violence. The main scene that sticks out to me is, again, Rip's decapitated head being in her lunchbox. A cat's severed head looking back at her in a lunchbox with snarling teeth is terrifying. The idea of Rip getting torn apart and abused based off of his lore, quite dark, quite creepy. And I do like this book a lot. This was a really dark one, a really fun one, and one of the reasons why I think Stein does a great job with any book involving a cat. He just nails it. The short story called The Cat's Tale from, I think, Goosebumps book 2, Cry of the Cat, and I heard Claws is good. So yeah, very dark. Number 4. Number 3 on my list is actually my favorite book from the original 62 series, and it is the beginner to Stein's dark capabilities in kids horror, because this was the first book in the series and led to quite a bit of controversy, and after reading it, I'm not surprised as to why, and that is Welcome to Dead House. Welcome to Dead House is a super dark and sinister book, the very first book that Stein ever wrote, and he did say it's one of the scariest books he's ever wrote, and if you've read it, you can completely understand why. The scenes of seeing potentially dead people throughout a certain setting is terrifying. You have, again, animal abuse. There's an animal that gets killed off screen but still killed and comes back in a very terrifying form. You have this dream nightmare sequence where the main character sees her family as these rotting skeletons in a kitchen eating a plate full of moldy, rotten bones. That's disgusting and terrifying. You have this death scene of a certain character, and the way it's described, how their body falls apart, the way they may or may disintegrate in a certain way is horrifying. You have a lot of what's portrayed as death scenes. It's not exactly what's happening, but it's very, very dark, very disturbing. Again, the setting is super creepy. What they see inside of the house is creepy. And the ending is dark comedy. It is funny, I guess, in the moment, but what it actually implies is quite messed up and makes for the book to be very dark, very horrifying. And this is definitely one of the scariest Goosebumps books out there. And again, it was the first Goosebumps book that officially came out. So this caused a lot of controversy. And after you read it, you can understand why parents might have been a little bit hesitant for their kids to read it. But this is my favorite OG62 book I've read so far, and I absolutely love it for the reasons that I brought up. It's so dark and so damn sinister of a book. And number 2 on my list, we are hitting the top 2. Number 2 takes us back to Series 2000. Series 2000 was, in general, a much darker series, a much more consistently well-written series, and Stein was experimenting a lot. And this story, to me, is number 2 because it has a lot of dark moments, and they are grounded. They're surprisingly very grounded in horror. And this is stuff that could happen to us in real life, unfortunately, for the most part. And if you can't tell what I'm talking about, number 2 on my list is actually my favorite Goosebumps book I've ever read. It is the only Goosebumps book out of me that has gotten a complete perfect score, a 10 out of 10, or a 5 out of 5 if you use a star rating. And that is Series 2000. Are You Terrified Yet? Are You Terrified Yet? Is such a fantastic and monumental Goosebumps book because it is completely, and I mean completely, grounded in reality. There is no supernatural, extraterrestrial, monster, creature feature, abnormal stuff going on in this book. It's very much grounded. It's a coming-of-age story for the main character, Craig, and he's dealing with these bullies who are trying to prank him and trying to see how brave he really is because he moves into a new neighborhood, a new school. He wants to be this brave guy that he's never been in his past, and quickly after some research, some bullies find out he may or may not be lying and try to put him to the test. And it's very much a book about dares and stuff like that. You know, there are pranks involved. However, it's more so towards the end. Most of it is really just dealing with dares and testing the kid's willpower. And it's a very dark and terrifying book. You have this opening scene where Craig basically creates this heroic image where he saves a baby from being hit by a car. That's right, he stops a car crash from happening involving a baby and, you know, this vehicle. And potentially Craig is risking his life, potentially being hit and ran over by the car as well. So quite the dark intro to start off his character. And then you have a scene involving a jar of spiders where he may or may not have to put his hand in there, and you get this very terrifying body horror. As you can imagine, thousands of spiders potentially making contact with your hand, him dealing with the pain, the uncomfortable feeling, and just how it makes your skin crawl and makes you kind of just especially if you're terrified of spiders like I am. You know, I don't like spiders, and the idea of doing this is so horrifying that it still makes me cringe. And that is, you know, one of the first big dares that he deals with. You have the climax of the story where it deals with certain characters having to touch dead bodies, sleep with dead bodies, break into a morgue and shake hands with them and hug them. And it's very disturbing, just making body contact with these dead bodies and some of the horrific stuff that happens involving that. Some of the twists that come in the climax that you're under the impression are really happening despite some of the, you know, reveals that you get. It's all very dark, all very disturbing, and it's definitely one of the darkest Goosebumps books because you can imagine this stuff happening to you. You can visualize yourself in these characters' positions, seeing what they're seeing, feeling what they're feeling. You know, it's just very immersive, very disturbing, and this is all stuff that can happen to you in real life, which adds to the darkness. The idea that you can imagine this horrifying stuff happening to you, your friends, or somebody you loved, that hits harder than something that's more fictional. And there is one fictional story above this, just for how explicitly dark it was. But this is definitely one of the most terrifying books. So the title, Are You Terrified Yet? Yes, I was terrified reading this book, and I think all of you who read it probably were. And for those of you who haven't, I would definitely recommend you read it. And that's because it's one of the best Goosebumps books ever written, but on top of that, it is one of the darkest Goosebumps book for that very reason that I brought up. And that leads us to number one. And number one is actually a modern Goosebumps book that I think is one of the darkest out there, one of the most gruesome, and honestly, if they wanted to make this into a movie, a well done, well shot movie tied to Goosebumps and just making it pretty much accurate to the entire book, maybe except for the very twist ending and some things in the climax, this would be a perfect story that I think should be adapted. And that is from Most Wanted, one of the special edition books, Zombie Halloween. Now, it's no shocker to me that Zombie Halloween would be number one because this is essentially a spiritual successor to Welcome to Dead House in my eyes. There was a Welcome to Dead House sequel called Happy Holidays from Dead House that was never created. We just heard about the name and saw the cover. However, this book feels very much like Welcome to Dead House, except in a way on steroids because it has a deeper plot. It is more gruesome, more fearsome in certain ways, and just more explicit with the dark stuff in it. This feels like a spiritual successor to Welcome to Dead House. So Zombie Halloween is a very great book that I've read, and I'd recommend all of you check it out. It has some horrifying stuff in it. First of all, the prologue takes place in the 1940s involving basically a man or boy named Mario Manzetti. Mario, in the prologue, is described as being with his friend Ivy and their younger brother. And there's a graveyard scene. They walk into this graveyard, hear these horrific sounds, this very eerie atmosphere. They see some dark, potentially dark things. And then they end up in this kind of life or death, very stressful situation where they may or may not fall into a actual grave site and almost be stuck down there with some horrific things all around them. And as they get out of the situation and get back to their decrepit, abandoned-looking house that's very much reminiscent to Welcome to Dead House's, place, they go down to the basement and they find something horrifying. They may or may not find these tunnels, go down there and find out where these tunnels are connected to and see something horrific. And something happens to one of the main characters in that prologue that is horrifying, and you get this jump scare sequence that is gruesome, dark, and honestly, the violent implications of what happened are, again, they'll throw you off. They'll leave you in some shock and awe. And when you get to the main story, it continues the horrifying atmosphere of this town, potentially zombies, the undead, graveyard, cemetery, some body horror, some eerie feelings you get towards certain family members and characters, and even the neighbors. And overall, it's just a very dark, genuinely scary story, and you get a lot of scenes at this graveyard and cemetery involving different characters that put you on the edge of your seat. And again, if the prologue was that scary, just read the rest of the book. It's going to continue on that atmosphere and leave you feeling quite satiated after you finish reading it. So yeah, Zombie Halloween is number one on my list, and these are my top 5 scariest Goosebumps books that I've read so far. Let me know if you agree with my list. Let me know if you enjoyed. If you did, hit that subscribe button down below. It's free, and hit that like button as well. Again, a free way to support me. Lets me know you guys are engaged with the content. You like it and you want to see more, so feel free to hit both of those. And also, of course, comment down below. Let me know your thoughts and opinions. Do you agree with my list? Would these be on your top 5 darkest Goosebumps books? What are some books you think I left out that you think I should check out, or maybe I should have included on the list? And yeah, just start some dialogue down there in the comments, and stay tuned for more videos to come. I have a lot of content on my channel. This is your first time stumbling upon it, and if it's not, I'm happy that you're always checking out my videos, and you are a big part of my family, my friend group, and I love each and every single one of you. That's all I have. I may be getting a little bit more busy as my college semester this semester is full of work and full of studying and full of, quite busy stuff that I'm a little bit overwhelmed by, but I'm still going to find times to make videos, do some collaborations here and there, and still put out content. It may not be as frequent as it was during my winter break that I upload a lot of content on. That's why I uploaded as much as I did, because I knew what was going to happen. So check out some of the videos I recently dropped, and stay tuned for more content. And yeah, that's all I have for today. Deuces. No, seriously. I mean, my browser history getting leaked to my mother, that has to be one of the top 5 biggest L's that a man can take. And tough to say that she might have regretted some life decisions after she saw that history. I would have much rather her preferred, just to go on Live Leak or maybe the Reddit 50-50 challenge. Might have been more PBS Kids than what she saw.